Greetings, everyone. This is Virtuous Roots, where we reclaim virtue to bring it to our home and yours. And I'm Thomas McCuddy.
And I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And tonight we are talking about how can parents encourage their children to stand firm in their Christian beliefs. I think this is a very important and timely question, especially for those that have children entering high school. I mean, it even starts younger than that, but entering high school. But the statistics are staggering for youth that leave the faith in college. So I think this is important. So let's begin. I'm going to read Proverbs 22:6 that says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it." And so we read that, and I think that is what most of us lean on to answer this question of how do we get our children to stand firm.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot in that verse that kind of needs to be brought out. And how do parents, in a practical way, implement this in their families' lives? So, what do you think the leading problem is for why children leave the faith? Like, why? How do they either? Why do they leave, or why do they not stand firm in it at all? What do you think the
Mm-hmm.
leading problem is?
I think what I've seen in youth ministry is that, first of all, kids don't own their faith, so it's not really theirs.
Mm-hmm.
They're brought up, and this is where it's a different discussion. Do we force our kids to go to church? How much? Those kinds of things. But I think there's an element that they sort of fall in line, and we think that, oh well, they enjoy going to church, they're involved in the youth ministry, they do these things, they're okay. And again, as a youth pastor for well over 15 years, to watch students go into college, and we would use the words, we would say, they would abandon their faith, but I began to realize I don't think that they were there to begin with.
Yeah.
Mm,
Like, they were riding along, but they didn't own it. It wasn't theirs. And I think in some ways it goes back to they weren't taught, and didn't maybe I think sometimes they don't have the opportunities to stand firm and learn what that's like. Like, again, there's almost this situation where maybe they weren't challenged. Maybe they didn't encounter like real kind of challenges until they get to college,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're no longer in that bubble. it's
I
it's
but I think
dynamic. It's different for different ones, but these are just patterns
yeah, but
Yeah.
I
that
feel
I'm
like
seeing.
that's a cop out. Like I don't feel. I think it's easy to say, well, if they went the way of the world in college, they were never saved in the first place. Like it never. I think it's a cop out because I know there are kids. So like I'm not going to say across the board they were all saved,
Mhm.
but I know kids who I would say absolutely owned it and yet still left the faith when they went to college
Mhm.
or beyond. So I don't think we can just like I guarantee I'm with you that there's a lot of those, but it can't be a blanket statement because there's those kids that there's just no way they should have left and yet they still depart.
Working in the school, Christian schools, as well as working at the church, I've recognized there's like this kind of pattern where the home life mirrors somewhat, like they can put up a front, and then we all do this, I guess, and to a certain degree, but is putting on like kind of a front when you're out, or putting on some sort of like kind of act when you're at church, and you have a certain way you go about, and you want people to perceive you, and your kids, they see you when you go home, and if those two different the two different ways of being don't match, like the way you act at church compared to the way you're acting at home, the kids when they get older, I feel like they're just like, well, why bother with the act? I could just live the way my parents have always taught me to live at home. And and I think that sometimes, I'm not saying across the board, I know that there's other issues, but I've noticed that kind of when the kids notice any sort of hypocrisy in their parents, they're gonna, and with association with their faith or lack thereof, the kids kind of, they take that and they make that, they kind of embody that, and they're like, and I believe that just when they get an opportunity to choose, like I'm at college or I'm out of the home, why bother going to church? That's just,
Well,
my
I think you're really hitting one of the biggest problems nail right on the head. I would argue that we don't all do that though. Like I think a lot of people do that, but I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's just a way of life that we put on our front. because I think the natural conclusion is, okay, well then if we want to train our children,
Mm-hmm.
then we don't put the front on. We either make ourselves better and be the people that we show ourselves at church, or we, just live out who we're at home, and then our children are gonna, definitely not, stand strong in their faith if we're weak, wet noodles when confronted.
Yeah, if we model it, and I think it's a common kind of like, as we're talking about virtue, as flame is a virtue. It's usually one of those things that has to be modeled by our parents. I think we come to that conclusion quite often with our other discussions, because it's just, if they don't see you doing it. Because my kids, they'll pick up on everything I'm doing, and anytime I give them a little bit of, like, that kind of, I say something off color or something, they're going to pick it up and they're going to include that in their vocabulary. They're going to include that if I'm sarcastic, or if I'm doing, everything that I do is being kind of modeled by my children, even.
Right.
And I realize that I'm like, how I treat my wife, they see that, and that's how they're going to treat her, and all these different things. And I think it goes, when we talk about our faith, and even on the other extreme, where, like, so if you're a pastor or you're somebody that does a lot for the Lord, and you're doing it, like, you're neglecting the home life. And I've seen this too. So those kids get a little bitter because they see their dad. My dad's a pastor, and he has all these people that, admire him or whatever, and he's doing all these things for the Lord, but it doesn't seem like he's doing much at home. And that's I think a difficult thing, is because, as we all know, because we're all pastors here, that the work never ends, and we have to make those boundaries. So, like, with that, because that's something that crosses my mind.
But I mean,
as well.
you're keying on virtue and vice, right?
Yeah,
You're keying
exactly.
on the virtue
Mhm.
is what we strive after in the middle, but the vice would be the excess or the
Yes, sir.
defect.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there an excess of serving too much? Well, there is, if you're sacrificing your initial, your first ministry of the home.
Yes, sir.
I think you're absolutely in that. Yeah, so you're keying on an excess and defect there.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about it on Sunday in our Sunday school, and I think Thomas and I were talking about it a little while ago. One of the key words here, and I'm going to turn it to you in a second, and in Proverbs 22:6 is train up a child in the way he should go. And so there's that element of training. And,
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of us, me, say I want to lose weight, which sure I do, but like I go to the gym, and he's like, hey, I need to hook you up with one of these physical trainers. And there's two physical trainers walks out, and one of them is 400 pounds with, 40% body fat, and the other one is ripped and knows what he's doing. I'm not going to look at the 400-pound obese man to tell me how to lose weight and to get in shape.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go with the guy who can actually do it himself. And so I think that kind of what you're alluding to actually is, are we a 400-pound obese spiritual parent
That's a good analogy.
to our children, where they see one thing, I can talk the talk, but am I truly living it out?
Yes, sir.
Or am I, spiritually, physically fit,
Mm-hmm.
and actually am able to train my child in the way of the Lord? So I think a lot of parents look at training as, well, they go to Sunday school, so the Sunday school teacher is supposed to train them, and the pastor is supposed to train them, and whatever youth program, whether it be, the myriad of youth programs, well, they're supposed to train them. I even send my kid to a Christian school, and they're supposed to train them.
Yep.
But the reality is, none of that's enough. So when Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, how do you train a child?
So let's start with an analogy. Jesus says this in a parable. He talks about the soils and the, there's different responses. And so the two responses that really stand out are the soil where the seed takes root and grows up quickly, but it dies away because it had no root in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the soil that has all the thorns, and that's where the cares of the world choke it. So I think as we're talking about, if we're emphasizing kids leaving, what's going on. So some of that training is developing that root.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have root in themselves. And the word there that's used in the Greek is the same word where we get our English word scandalized, that there's this, it says it falls away, it's scandalized. And it says the reason it does not have root in itself. So as we're looking to train, this is where we train not just in terms of and I have to be careful in how I say this. So when I think of training a child morally, and to have good morals, to have good character, I think we don't train the right way. So going back to the analogy of physical training, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't lift the right way, or you lift the wrong way, you're going to end up actually damaging your body in the process. Or you focus. My little brother found this out. He was training, trying to build muscle, and he would do all of this work, and he wasn't building muscle. And it was because he was missing it from his diet.
Yeah.
That he needed to change his diet. So it's not a simple answer many times. So I think I like to frame the discussion with children like that. It's not a simple answer. It's not like, oh, here's the one thing you're missing. Here's
Right.
the silver bullet. That if we're wanting our kids to develop that root, part of that is going to be training them, teaching them right for wrong, but doing so from a place of loving the good
Mm-hmm.
rather than just behaving well.
Yep.
Because I think that's been the history. That's what I've seen throughout so many families, like just trying to get their kids to do right. And the kids will end up doing right. But once you remove that environment, they don't have that
Yep.
anymore. So the child that loves the good, that's been trained to identify the good, to love that good, to properly order those loves, that's where you're going to have that kind of training. The same way if you're going to the gym, part of the problem is that we'll just go with my issue. If it's cherry pie, if that's my love and I'm supposed to be losing weight, well, I need to properly order my loves. Do
Yeah.
I love being healthy and being my best self for my family, or do I love cherry pie? And so as long as my loves are disordered, then even if I can play the game for a while, eventually I'm going to fall back in my old ways. I might
Yeah.
be able to, almost like because that's in some ways what the fruit of the rocky soil did.
Yeah.
It grew up. It had every indication, like it grows up quickly, like, wow, this is going to do something, but it didn't have the root in and of
Mhm.
itself.
So
And-
I think you're keying in on something because you said it's not just it's the love of the good, right?
Yep.
So it's the love of the true, it's the love of the
Mhm.
beautiful. So
Mhm.
it's more than just seeking the true, the good, and the beautiful, but it's
Mhm.
doing it for the right reasons.
Mhm, mhm.
We have this bigger movement throughout the podcast space where people are talking about virtue. It's starting to like pop its head up a lot more, but there's quite a few who are approaching it from a secular nature.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can get to the idea of virtue from the secular, but one of the things that we're talking about here is standing firm in their Christian beliefs. The problem is if we only key in on the cardinal virtues, we can get it from the secular, but we're still missing what the truth is
Mhm.
and the reason in which we ought to pursue them.
Mhm.
So this is virtuous roots. So let's talk about the virtue, not individual virtues, but the idea of the theological virtues and why those transform the cardinal virtues in the reason of why we do this. It's like, how do those come together?
So your theologicals are faith, hope, and love, as listed in 1 Corinthians 13. So I also love in 2 Peter, when that's kind of our ministry verse, 2 Peter 1:5, when he says, "Add with your faith virtue." He starts with that faith, and this is a conversation I had many times in my most recent trip to South Africa, and we actually did like whole days on just what the virtues
Mhm.
are, and this kept coming up, and they're like, well, how is this not just secular? It's like, because this begins with faith. We're believing in God and we're rightly oriented towards God.
Mhm.
We have our hope ultimately in God. We have our love that comes from God. We love because he first loved us. So this transforms in many ways who we are through this redemption we have. And because of that, now when we talk about the cardinal virtues of prudence and, doing what's wise, and we talk about justice and giving what's due, this fortitude, standing firm, which is often what's lacking
Mm-hmm.
when these kids, just like you mentioned, who have faith, they love Jesus, but they lack within themselves the root to withstand. And I think that's what they're missing in the training, that they might like, but they love Jesus, but they've not been taught how to stand.
Yeah.
I love Jesus, but if I've never been taught how to take care of my body, then it's going to show
but
that
I
I've not
wanna
taken care of my body.
I want to extend the parable because I think that parable is important, but it's usually talking about the soils, right?
Mhm.
And so as we talk about training our children, yeah, we're talking about the root, but I think we're also talking about, preparation of the soil itself,
Hmm.
which I think starts at a very young age. So I think it's more than just the root. I think we're cultivating the soil. I'm a budding farmer, right? Like I don't know nothing, but I'm trying to learn. We have
Mhm.
the sandiest soil here
Yeah,
in
no.
North Carolina, and I want to grow strawberries, and it's just not going to be an easy thing. And so I'm going to have somebody come out and test the soil, and it's going to tell me all of the deficiencies in the
Mhm.
soil that are missing. So do I
That's
need to
good.
add nitrogen? Do I need to add carbon? What is it that this soil is missing?
Mhm.
And
That's
then
good.
they're going to give me a recommendation of saying, okay, you need to take these types of wood chips and put it in your soil. You need to actually cultivate the
Mhm.
soil in and of itself. Look, your soil is way too rocky. You need to come through this thing and you need to pick these rocks out one by one with your little fingers. They also make machines, but I'm trying to extend the metaphor.
Yeah,
All
no,
right.
this
So,
is good. This is good.
and so, like, I think that as we talk about that, yeah, I think there's an importance in the roots, but the soil itself, like, I
Yeah.
think we as parents are situated specifically to be able to identify what that soil is missing.
But
Yeah.
that parable, the point is the soil was rocky, that there were
Right.
things in the soil
But
Yeah.
that's what I'm
that
saying.
was
Yeah.
preventing
That's
the
why I'm trying
roots
to
from
extend it to the
growing.
soil.
Right.
Yeah. But I think as a parent, when we test our children and we allow our children to face adversity,
Mhm.
we can identify the rockiness. We can identify what's there
Hmm.
and we can remove it. And by remove it, I mean it takes, if our child is obstinate, like we can see that. We had this conversation. We can see that obstinance, and we can remove that. And
Yep.
it's going to be painful, but it needs to happen. It's going to take a lot of effort from me to cultivate that soil. But I think that I think initially, I love the parable. I think that soil is what's important, but I think we're the only ones situated on this planet who are going to be able to truly evaluate our children in the soil and test
Yep.
that soil to figure out what do we need to do to it.
Hmm.
And I think that soil test, I mean, that's kind of like to kind of extend that metaphor a little bit, like just us looking at our child and being honest in their, because like my daughter tends to be like, if I were to look at her, if I was judging the soil, would be she lacks, she's more the rocky soil, the fortitude issue. She has a really hard time, um, like getting things started and having that, the kind of fortitude or that courage to go forward. She finds herself like worrying about a lot of things, and I find that yeah, like if I'm just looking at her, she's 7 years old, and if she continues with this pattern and continues in this soil without any intervention from me or my wife, like she can grow up and she's basically, she's, what can she do? She's gonna be a lot of fear in her life. There's gonna be a lot of things that are gonna hold her
Right.
back from finding her potential. And so like I want to, my wife and I are trying, and it's hard, especially with kids, to have that sort of, you have to be kind of cautious and you have to approach them a certain way, and you got to, moving those stones has to be careful. And I think when you're talking about moving with your hands, sometimes that's what needed to be. If you want to get that soil to be, perfect, sometimes the machines miss the little pebbles and stuff. And sometimes we just have to pick those out, and that takes that time of training them, allowing them to have some adversity, and encouraging them through it. Like my older son, he is the one that needs a lot of encouragement, and so I'll be intentionally encouraging him when he does something that worthy of encouragement. I'm not just going to encourage him for anything. I think he needs to earn it, but him just taking efforts where he was kind of lacking in the past, I'm going to encourage him. I'm going to make sure he knows that it's very pleasing to me that he's really trying. And my other son, he's the complete opposite, where he has like his head's in the clouds. He's very like he always talks about himself. He has no problem, with his self-esteem. So for me, he has like that worldliness that if I don't deal with it now, like that can choke him out in the future, especially once he gets the opportunity. Well, I don't have to go to church. Like my parents aren't bringing me to church today, or there's no reason for me to go to church. I can hear them like talking this way.
So I'm not specifically calling you out on this.
Yeah.
I know that as raising children, and I see those things in my children.
Mm-hmm.
My two youngest daughters, they're both literally me. Now, they are complete opposites,
Yeah, but that's
but they are
yep.
each have they're
like-
each different parts of me, and every
Mhm.
time I see them, I know that those children are literally me. So I think it's important that when we evaluate our children, that we also realize that
Yep.
more than likely they're a reflection of us. So if
Mhm.
we're rocky soil, how do we cultivate theirs? So I think part of this is going to be, it goes right back to the 400-pound obese physical trainer who's
Yeah.
going to put me on a
Mhm.
diet. I think many of us as parents approach it with do as I say, not as I do.
Yep.
And I think it's important to, if we're seeing it in our children, do we need to evaluate ourselves and wonder why they're weak in their faith, or wonder why they're not standing firm upon upon Christian beliefs, upon the truth.
And I think it's worth mentioning to extend again the analogy we've been using, because you mentioned this kind of at the beginning. When we're looking to cultivate that soil and till that soil, I think that part of that is going to be what parents have done is they've used the machinery of the church to try to
The church,
till
the Sunday
that
school,
till
the
that
school,
till that soil.
everything but themselves.
And you make that point. We need to get in there with our hands sometimes, and part of that is like you said, recognizing where our issues are.
Yep. Absolutely.
And being able then to deal with it. I think when we're honest with ourselves, and I've done this with myself, to be able, like I tell my boys, this is my issue. This is something I struggle with. They know that, they understand that, and then we can sort of work together.
Yeah, work on it
in that
together.
sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
But being
That's
open and honest about it.
Yeah.
And I think that
Absolutely.
the reason why in this ministry we look to name these virtues, name these vices so much, because just like when you were talking about, your aspirations to be a farmer,
Mhm.
and you're like, okay, what do I need to put in the soil? Nitrate, carbon, I'm just using whatever you said.
Sure. Yeah.
I have no idea. I mean, I'm one of those, like, I thought you just put animal droppings all over it and that was good to go. So
Well, you might be surprised. There's hot manure and cold manure. Some animal droppings you can put right on it, and others you have to wait a year.
Because they burn
And I say
everything up.
that only because I think it's important to this analogy
Yep.
in that
Oh yeah, that's really good.
you have to truly understand the scriptures.
Right.
You have to truly understand the
Mhm.
virtue.
Mhm.
You have to understand how it's supposed to be implemented in your life,
Mhm.
and not put hot manure, which would be, I'm not going to, manure in the good sense of it helps you grow. You don't want to put something that's going to burn your plants. You need
Yep.
to do it in the right way at the right
Right.
time. So using that prudence. And so I'm extending that,
No, it
I
makes
don't know
sense.
either,
No,
but I'm
that's-
learning this. Right?
No, this is
So-
good. I like that. That analogy works perfectly, I think.
But I think a lot of parents are going to say, "Well, what am I looking for? What is it?" And that's why literally, and we can't even in one whole episode name
Yeah,
all these things and go
But,
through.
Exactly.
but so
We're
I'm gonna-
developing those kinds of materials to help parents to say these are the things to look for, and that's why if you're the budding farmer, if I use that, and you're like, okay, well, here's the starting. This is what we've talked about. Here's your cardinal virtues. Here's your big categories. Then underneath that, here's some clear things to be looking for. And you
Mhm.
start by also looking in yourself, knowing what your defects are.
Mhm.
If you can identify those things and know and put a name to it, then chances are your child has that same vice, has that same defect, because they learned it from you, whether or not you meant to show it.
Well,
So
Exactly.
And just to answer the question, I don't know what I'm looking for. It begins with scripture,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
If you can't look at your child and measure, if you can't look at yourself and or your family and or your child and measure it against what God has laid out as true, good, and beautiful, the right way of living, then the first step is at least reading scripture so that you can better understand. And then let us come alongside with this virtues, but like scripture would be the forefront
Yes, sir.
to
Yep.
encourage your children to stand firm in their Christian beliefs.
mhm.
So, gentlemen, fantastic conversation. As always, I greatly appreciate it. You can find us on familiesofvirtue.com and our podcast, Virtuous Roots, on all of the main streaming platforms. God bless, and we'll talk to you next time.